For today, we are going to talk about the elements and principles of design that are used in fashion. Now, so when we talk about elements of design, these are essentially the basic units or the components of design that essentially become the building blocks of any fashion or aesthetics. The design elements and the principles are the components that are used in design, art, that will include fashion, architecture, graphic design, painting, or for that matter, sculpture. The elements form the basic vocabulary of the visual design, whereas the principles constitute the rules, the broad rules by which these elements are used for composing a product. Now, why does it? Why is it important? It is important because it communicates uh, design itself, communicates identity, emotion, and purpose. It also influences the perception of the viewer, as well as it creates a trend setting look. The purpose of design essentially is to combine art with function. So, design, as we define it, is something which is called as which is said to be a problem solving technique. So, if there is a problem and we try to solve it, we call that design. And so that problem solving technique has to have come with a purpose of function. Now when we talk about the elements of design, these are essentially the elements of design: dot, line, shape, form. As we move, we will talk about each of these elements, um, starting with the dot. Dot essentially, as we also call it, point or a dot, it's essentially a coordinate without any dimension. It is essentially the simplest and the fundamental, and it forms the building block of any other element. For example, if it is a line, shape, or form. So we call it an element, coordinate without a dimension. It can be tangible, it might not be tangible. We can see it with our bare eyes, or we might not. It's just there. When you combine a bunch of dots together, it can be visible, but on its reality, it might not be. Will essentially will be the building block. Anything when we mark anything beyond that dot, it becomes a combination. Now, if we look at these figures here on the, you will see that the first one, the figure one, the dot is at the center and it is equidistant from all sides. Hence, it also creates a perception of a balance and a focus. Whereas the dot in the point B, the figure B, it is a little off center and it has a varying distance from the sides. Hence, it is often very disrupting. So, when we increase or decrease the number and the size of dots, it means that there might be a change in meaning or perception. Uh, so, for example, if we see figure A, we have repetitive dots with equidistant, with a regular proximity to each other. The entire thing looks very balanced. On the other hand, on this one, we have dots which is there, uh, but then they're of different sizes and they're placed really randomly. And this technique of doing this, it's often called pointillism, where we use multiple small distinct dots of different colors, and so that those are applied in a sort of pattern to form a composition. And when we view this from a distance, it creates a form of composition which which is a recognizable visual. So if you look at this image, it is a technique by Angelo Franco, uh, creating a painting. And dots are also popular because of the Ben Ray dots printing process. It is named after Benjamin Henry. day junior. So these are colored dots, equal in size and distributed evenly throughout the area. Uh, Hello, I hope I am audible. I think आपको थोड़ा वॉल्यूम बढ़ाना पड़ेगा बेटा. If you can't hear me. Hello, uh, Swaroop ji, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
ठीक है, thank you
You're
sir.
quite ready.
ठीक है. Okay, so essentially these are color dots which are equally sized and uh, it is distributed equally. So the idea is to create optical illusions through this. When we put these dots together in multiple arrangements, it can create lines, shapes, curves. Coming to the next element, which is as we call it the lines. Now for lines, it is something which is a two-dimensional thing as compared to the one-dimensional dot that or a dimensionless element which is a dot. We have something which has a visual path and it is connecting the eyes. Now there can be a multiple ways of dot in which we have dots. Now so we often call dots when joined together and placed together very close to each other, they are they forms a line. Now, how we are placing the dots will create the line. Now, there can be different types of lines. It can be, it can be a flat, which is a on pen line on paper, or a three-dimensional line like a rod, which is there on grooves. Uh, Now, there can be something which is some lines which are very obvious in we see in design, like the lines that we see on pavement or the lines which are essentially implied, like for example, the edge of any product. It's also a line. We often use lines to define the outline or to shade or do hatching or cross hatching techniques to create different shapes to it. Now, when we talk about lines, it can be straight, sharp, smooth. It can be organic, soft, lumpy, curved. Uh, it can remain constant or vary within in width or thickness along their length or the entire things. It can stoop, drip, break across the surface. The strokes of line express how the marker is. The shorter, lighter strokes indicate very nervousness and uncertainty, while lines made with single stroke indicates confidence and thus focus. Lines can loop around to form enclosures which has no ending points. So these are essentially different types of lines made to create patterns or scribbles for that matter. When we talk about lines in garments, uh, they play a very important role in how visual designs work. And so, for example, if we uh, look at bodies, we have to understand something that it creates the silhouette, the line itself, the outline of the garment or the silhouette is created by a line itself, and whatever the space within is creates an optical illusion. So, if there are seam lines on a dress, it can lead the eye in a particular direction. Um, it can also have a very strong physical or psychological effect as well. So it gives a impression to the direction of the body. So, for example, the same dress, if you see the image, the same dress, when we have a seam line which is from the center and has a straight vertical line, it gives body the person to be taller. On the other hand, when we have a seam line on the middle with a waistline or something like that, it generally breaks the eye and the person appears to be shorter than usual. Now, as a designer, we can use lines with a number of ways, with a number of directions, the how we use it in the body. Structurally, we can use techniques like construction lines, which are like seams, darts, ducts, or shiring. Uh, the edges of the silhouettes or the outer edges, collars, sleeves, belts, that can also create lines. We can also have folds by pleats, gathers, ducts, or for that matter, draping. And then there are also decorative lines, which for the trims, such as braids, piping. There can be a row of buttons, insertion, bias binding, the trims, laces, all these things together can create a bunch of lines. This figure shows different lines, how lines are used in the garments, or with the piping or with pleats, or for that matter, the cross hatching technique. Coming to the shape, we'll talk about shape and form one by one. Shape essentially gives the idea of the silhouette and structure of the garment. So once the 2D line converts to a 3D part that becomes a shape, it can also enhance and alter the proportions of the body. So lines essentially, as we see, it uh, leads to shape. So it's two-dimensional line which is turning into a 3D shape, uh, which then might become a form. So So when a line itself is crossing itself or intersect with other lines to enclose, to make a shape and create a shape, so the outer edges and the contour area surrounded by a closed line is on the shape, and the outline of the shape will be termed as the silhouette. So when we talk about shapes, there are essentially three kinds: geometric, organic, and abstract. Geometrics are shapes that are that are formed of man-made structures like circles, squares, rectangles, triangles, anything which has a certain set of measurements which can be measurable, which can be constructed very mathematically. Organic shapes are something which we find in nature, something which is very organic in nature. So shapes like leaves, flowers, seashells, rocks, anything which is very irregular, which cannot be, the repetition is not exact, the patterns are not exact, the dimensions of their angles are not exact, are organic shapes. And then we have abstract shapes. Now these abstract shapes are shapes that are neither geometric nor natural. Um, it can be man-made, but it is something which shows, which denotes something, but it doesn't define it properly. So geometric shapes, the first thing we do when we work with shapes is geometric shapes. Even as kids we did geometric shapes, and the first thing, it's very important, calculated and very regular in structure, very order-like, standardized shapes. Now, geometric shapes can be replicated into garments also. So, what we see as the Japanese kimono design, so the sleeves, or for that matter, the t-shirt, all these are very geometric in nature. Structure wherein it looks, a t-shirt looks very like a T. A kimono has a very rectangular structure to it. Coming to the organic shapes, it represents the natural world, and it's very free flowing, very irregular, um, asymmetrical at times. It can have certain repetitions, but the repetition doesn't have to be very regular. Um, the idea of organic using organic shape is to create a sense of relaxation, freedom, so that the monotony and the restriction of structures are broken. This is an involved test which is often creates a bunch of organic shapes. This is done for psychological testings. Abstract space shapes are often, very simplified versions of organic shapes. So, for example, as we see this image, this is a person on a wheelchair. So they are shapes which can be recognized, but they are not the realistic shapes. Uh, we can also see, like, we have those stick drawings of figures, of bodies, trees, all those things. Those are abstract shapes. They're not realistic, but at the same time, you can identify what it is. Coming to forms, so when the two-dimensional shapes becomes a three-dimensional structure, wherein we have width, height, and depth, that becomes a form. It can be described again as organic or geometric, or for that matter, abstract at times as well. Uh, so, organic would be something which we see in the nature. So, our mountains, again, seashells, or anything which we see in nature is an organic shape, organic form. A geometric form, on the other hand, is something which is corresponding to the two-dimensional form of the geometric shape. So, square to a cube or a rectangle to cuboids, a circle to a sphere, all these are geometric forms. Now, when we talk about shapes and forms in fashion, something that becomes very important is the silhouette of the garment. The garments essentially are always three-dimensional as it is can be viewed from front, back, as well as from the side, and the contouring, the way the body moves, and how the garment fits into the contours of the body. It also gives it shapes. Uh, so at times it is used to alter the actual shape of the body or conceal or reveal its certain ways. Uh, Now there are human bodies are generally of four types, specifically women's bodies. The first one is a trapeze or a pear-shaped body, where the lower half is heavier than the top. The second one is a hourglass shape, where proportionately heavy top and hips, with a very slim waist. Third one is a tube shape, where it is equally proportioned, uh, regular shaped shoulder to the hip figure. And finally, it's a wedge shape, which is a broad shoulder, deeper into a narrow waist, and very long legs. So, depending on what sort of body structure we have, uh, we can decide what kind of garment flat goes, the most flattering with the body type. So, for example, if somebody has a trapeze body type, where the lower half of the body is already very voluminous, uh, they would rather avoid wearing something which is, very voluminous already on the lower half. They can actually try to wear voluminous sleeves to give an look of a more, you know, slimmer waist. For example, if somebody has an hourglass figure where the waist is already very slim, the focus should be on clenching the waist and not wearing a lot of baggy clothing. Now, garments can be designed with straight lines, regular shapes of cubes, rectangles, squares. Now, in those cases, they appear very stable. The sharper the angles, diagonal lines of shapes of triangles, diamonds, pyramids, they so appear unstable but also looks very dynamic. So uh, curved shapes, on the other hand, convey a very soft or a gentle appearance, which generally suggests femininity. Uh, like we discussed in terms of lines, also, if we have vertical lines, here also, if there is a vertical space between shapes, uh, it might the person might look taller and narrower. Horizontal would make the figure appear shorter and wider. So if you look at this figures, the first one, you know, uh, the right shoulder would appear that advanced because it overlaps the other fill shape. Uh, so on the basis of how the designs are there, it might uh, decide, for example, the center one shows shapes of circles and at the same time squares inside the grid patterns. Um, Now, this doesn't interlock, so thus it creates new shapes within each other. Coming to the next part, which is the texture. Now, texture is essentially uh, the particular look or a feel of the material. Now, this feel can be of smoothness, roughness, whether it is shiny, whether it's matte, whether is there a frizz. Texture is basically the surface quality of the object. It can be rough, smooth, soft, hard. So in fashion design, we essentially talk about the surface of the fabrics and the trims that are used in the garments. Texture may be tactile, which you can feel, touch, and know, or visual, which is when we see, you know, through our eyes, right? So, for example, when we talk about velvet, it has a tactile texture to it. When you touch velvet, there is a fuzzy feel to it. Whereas fabrics like silk has a visual texture to it because visually you can see the shine and the sheen of the fabric. It's a very interesting element that is used in fashion and textile design uh, because it gives the designers aesthetic, perspective. Now, these are very common questions that are there. First is where texture is found. It is the thickness and how the fabric appears. So the kind of words that describe texture is loopy, fuzzy, furry, soft, shiny, and so on and so forth. Now, why is it important? It is important because it uh, gives the illusion of whether the body should appear larger or smaller. Fluffier textures makes the body look much more voluminous, bigger. So when we wear clothing which are lumpy, which are uh, based on woolen or you know pile fabrics, essentially gives a very larger structure. On the other hand, fabrics which are sleeker, like satin and silk, clings to the body and gives a much more streamlined look. It can also first create illusion depending on how it is draped, uh, the way the garment would appear when it is being worn. Texture have weight, size, bulk. It also has certain light absorbing and reflecting properties. Uh, so when we want to look thinner, you can look into fabrics that are medium to lightweight. Um, so things like flannel, velveteen, crepe, linen, all those things. Stiff fabrics can add bed to the body. So if you it's not it is not something which is thick as twill, gabardine, double knits. It will make the look bigger. Dull or matte finish texture will absorb light and hence will make the figure look smaller. Coming to the next element, which is space. Now, space is essentially where uh, where our object exists. So our object exists in a context. This is the context that creates the space. It is the area which contains the other designer elements. So anything So the background in which that is there, it can be two-dimensional, which is a flat thing, or a three-dimensional thing with volume. So we are talking about two-dimensional, so dots and lines. We are talking about a two-dimensional space. When we are talking about um, shapes or forms or textures, we are essentially talking about a three-dimensional space. So when we talk about space, there are generally two types that we generally talk about, the positive space and the negative space. Positive is something which is highlighted by the object, and negative is which is the open space or the shadow. So positive space refers to the main focus. The negative space, on the other hand, is spaces around it. The balance of these two would become the entire composition. So if we look at this image, you would realize that if we focus on the white part of the center, it creates a white face and it becomes the positive space, and the black section becomes the negative space. On the other hand, if you try to focus on the black section, it becomes two dark faces that are facing each other, and they become the positive space, and the white in the center becomes the negative space. Coming to the next element, it is the color. Now, when we talk about color, there are three things that we would talk about, which is the hue, value, and intensity. But more importantly, the purpose of color is because it essentially evokes certain emotion. Uh, so there are different colors associated with different um, season emotions that are there. So when we see white, it is meant for peace, whereas things like uh, colors like red is meant for something which has a lot of passion in it. It can be love, it can be anger, a lot of passion. Season also plays a very important role when we talk about color. For example, when we talk about the spring summer, we are essentially talking about very light and very frizzy colors, pastels, whereas in the autumn winter we are looking at darker colors. At the same time, we are also talking about personality. Uh, Personality plays a very important role. What color suits whom, that also plays a very important aspect. So essentially, it's a very important element of design, and it is something which is the most dominant because it uh, grabs the viewer attention the fastest. Uh, so if you want to highlight a specific section, usage of color is the most useful tool because of its visual properties. Uh, it also generates an instant reaction of like or dislike, while a form or texture comes generally only after the response to the color has been there. So whenever we go to buy a garment, we generally reach out at the color first that we like before we, you know, actually look at the other things. So when we look at color, there are a few things to be noted. First is that there is no physical substance. It's a visual experience and it is a powerful form of non-verbal communication. So while using color, the focus is on the effect rather than the cause. So when we talk about color, what it is, it's essentially a property of light, and the way we perceive that light uh, is uh, what we see, because in general sunlight is colorless and if all colors together we will see the white light, but it's only what is being reflected. So whatever is the something is which is very important when we talk about color and color theory is essentially this color wheel. Now This color wheel is where we have colors placed, and uh, it forms a sort of color based on of the vigor that we see on our rainbow. But more importantly, here we have three primary colors. Three primary colors are red, blue, and yellow, which are placed at three equidistant parts. Now, from that, when we start combining them, we start getting the secondary and the tertiary colors. So when we mix the yellow and the red, we get green. From yellow and blue, we get green. From yellow and red, we get orange, and from red and blue, we get purple. As and when we mix the secondary and the primary color, again we get the tertiary colors. Now, any color on the color wheel that are opposite to each other are the complementary colors. So, for example, blue and orange is a complementary color, yellow and purple, red and green, these are complementary colors. Now, it is said complementary because it has the maximum contrast that is there. What is the purpose of this wheel? It is an easy tool that explains the color interaction and combinations. So it understands the properties of the colors so that from the placement itself and their relationships with each other. Uh, and what are the different sort of combinations that can be formed. So it's a tool for organizing colors, representation, visual representation according to the chromatic relationships. How much? So, for example, if I again go back to the color wheel, we often, if we take only this set of colors, we generally call them achromatic because a similar chromatic range is there. Again, from here to here, if you take these colors, this will again be called achromatic because this has a similar colors range that is there. It shows the relationship between colors so that it is categorized into primary, secondary, and tertiary schemes. So this is also used to find the complementary, adjacent, the split complementary colors. Now coming to the color theory, uh, it is the practical guidance to make the color mixing and visual impact of specific color combinations. Uh, so it becomes the understanding of the color theory uh, for a design student or designers as a visual tool is very important. Again, like we did in the color wheel, if you see at the center of it, the triangle of this is the three primary colors, the red, yellow, and blue. As we move ahead, this one forms the secondary colors. So these three are the secondary colors, which would be the orange, purple, and green. And as we move ahead on the outside, if you mix each of the secondary and the primary color, we get the tertiary color. Now, when we talk about this, uh, there are few things. For example, when we see opposite to each other, any color that are opposite in the color wheel to each other, we call them the complementary color. Any color which are adjacent to each other, we call it the adjacent colors. Any color which is adjacent to the complementary colors. For example, if we take red, the complementary color is green, but the colors which are adjacent to the complementary colors, which is this yellowish green and the bluish green, this three together forms the split complementary range. When we talk about colors, it has three distinct properties. These are hue, value, and saturation, as also called intensity. Uh, It is also important to understand how these properties are related to each other. Firstly, hue is the color name of a specific wavelength of the light. It is in the pure color in the spectrum without addition of white or black. Uh, it is the, it can be primary, secondary, whichever, but it's the pure color. Value, on the other hand, is the lightness or the darkness of the color. Uh, it indicates the quantity light that is reflected. So let me give you show the example. So for example, these are the hues. These are the original colors that are there. Values, on the other hand, is how much lightness or darkness that is there. How much white do you mix into it? Uh, so, for example, in natural value, it looks the hue looks the purest. Uh, a color which is something like yellow is generally lighter value, while the color which is something like violet is naturally darker. Now, when we add pigments like white, blue gives a high value color. Adding black will give a low value color. So red turns into pink, which is a high value color. Addition of red and black to red will create maroon, which will create a low value color. Intensity is also known as saturation or the chroma of the color. This indicates the brightness or the dullness of the hue. It is determined by the amount of complementary hue that is mixed within the hue. So a saturated color essentially is a full color. It's a hue at the its own on its own. It is very high on intensity. The more you add the complementary color to it, or you add any sort of gray to it, it creates a lower intensity. So here we have the higher intensity color, which is red. The more you add gray to it, it reduces the intensity and hence reduces the saturation of the color. Now, before we talk about, you know, uh, importance, it is important to understand that, there is something called color harmony. So we feel that certain group of colors look very pleasing together and others may create a very, not very pleasing feeling. It is important to understand the interaction and relationship between colors of different shades and values with other colors or hues. Color harmony essentially refers to the pleasing results of combining more than one color. A designer would create color harmony with a combination of colors to create different looks or feelings. So, in order to plan a successful color combination, you would need to begin to understand the color relationships. So, our responses to colors are more emotional in nature. Color perception essentially is a very immediate person and very subconscious. The combination of practical properties and emotional properties are hence used by the designers. So, what can color do? It can attract very immediate attention, it can evoke an emotional response, it can also create a direct movement across the form, enhance visual appearance in the form, enhance spatial qualities of a form, can flatten the form, make it seem less three-dimensional. Uh, it can create illusions of concave, convex, or negative areas. It can disrupt the visual continuity. It can contrast, merge the forms with its environment. It can soften or harden a form. It can create illusions of transparency and translucency. Uh, it can also show your mistakes. Um, and so, understanding the significance of color in design is wherein we have to understand that, we first see color in nature, where the colors and dyes originally come from. So pigments were initially, originally used to brown by hand from natural ingredients or from plant dyes. So Egyptians would find blues from minerals, Greeks And Romans, they would make purple from molasses, yellow from sunflowers, red from uh, madder, or blues from indigo. However, now what we have are synthetic dyes, so we can achieve almost every shade, and rare colors is not something that we have now. So color has become very available, and it's an indicator of social trend, environment, cultures, but it also have commercial implications. So there are two general ways of looking at colors. Functional colors are something where the objective is in presenting legible formation and enabling visual perceptions. It serves a purpose, for example, the colors that we see in traffic light, or the safety hazards, or industrial equipment. And then we have marketable colors, which involves personal factors of aesthetic, social, cultural, or emotional attitudes or color preference. So essentially, a designer recognizes the color that can help or sell the products. So for example, the use of primary or bright colors for toys appeals children, and therefore it's important for visual promotional tool. On the other hand, the toy companies have to be very careful about using the safe or non-toxic quality of colors, no matter what is the visual appeal or the cost effect. So as a designer, one has to be very aware of the trends and other attributes that might affect your consumer preference. Coming to the principles of design, uh, so it relates to the principles uh, that are that are there, which are the rules that are there for how we can use our elements. Now, it is the principles of design, hence essentially is the way to guide um, how the elements can be used. So they 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 would essentially help establish a relationship among the elements that are used in design and organize their placement in compositions. Um, so these are few of the principles of design. We'll discuss one by one, starting with the first principle of design, that is balance. Now, balance, as we call it, is the state of equilibrium between different visual aspects of a composition. So, what do we mean by that? We mean that visual elements has to be uh, balanced in order to make the design very stable. Some elements may be the focal point so that it attracts the eye, uh, and it might also subdue the others, but the balance has to be done in such a way that a proper distribution of elements like color, texture, space, so that equilibrium is achieved through visual ways. Balance can be done in three ways. First is a symmetrical balance, like the first one is a symmetrical balance. There can be asymmetrical balance, like something like this. If we have this as a composition, this creates a symmetrical balance. And finally, we have a radial balance. Let's look at each of this from the context of fashion as well. Starting with symmetrical balance, it is also known as the formal balance, and it's a mirror image balance. So if as a nature, if you look at the human body itself, is also centrally symmetrical. It's a visually symmetrical body. So the idea is to achieve symmetry so that elements are equal in visual weights, uh, the composition on the other side of the horizontal or the vertical axis. So idea would remain that the focus of interest is visually balanced on both the side, uh, keeping the whoever is seeing it, the viewers, engaged with the composition of the design. Uh, Most of our formal wears are done through symmetrical balance because it gives a very dignified look, though it also gives a static look. Coming to asymmetrical balance is known as informal balance. It is done when the elements on both the sides of the axis are not exactly identical. Yet it is arranged in such a way that there is some sense of balance. Uh, it is varying on both the sides makes asymmetrical balance a little complicated or a little more difficult to achieve. Uh, though it is informal, but it has to be better planned because, uh, for example, if you look at the image, uh, though the garment has visual, different colors and different weights at different parts, but visually the stability has to be maintained. So even though white is a higher value color, we would use lesser white and more black because uh, the total weight of it balances out across the axis. Now we can achieve this with different colors, textures, there can be shapes, we can also have some pockets, seams, gathers, so that we understand the aesthetics of it. The third type of balance, we call it the radial balance. Uh, it is the arrangement of elements and spaces around the central point so that the elements look like that they are radiating from a central point. Uh, so it also, you know, ensures that the focal point leads towards the center. The eyes leads towards the center. Coming to the next principle of design is called proportion. So proportion essentially is the relationship between the parts of the design. It is the representation of the relative size, scale of various elements of design, the different parts that is there. It is determined by the distance, size, degree, and it plays a very important role in made art, architecture, or for that matter, fashion. Anything that we see in design is seen in the context of proportion to the human body. The There's something we call as the golden ratio or the golden mean. Now, it was developed as a mathematical ratio, and it occurs in the nature uh, and as well as the human face and the body. Now, the golden mean can be applied to geometric shapes, and it has this multiplication ratio of 1 is to 1.618, which creates a logarithmic spiral known as the golden spiral. Now, when we apply it to uh, design, it creates compositions that are aesthetically pleasing through some harmonious and balanced proportions. So, for example, when we have exact equal divisions in a subject, it creates some sort of monotony. Divisions that are too unequal will also create something which doesn't have harmony. On the other hand, if we have to create a good proportion, the idea is to create into one thirds, the rules of one thirds, or in the rules of contrast. Now, coming to the next principle of design, that is rhythm. Rhythm is something which is repetition or how the flow of the eye is achieved. It can be achieved through predation, radiation, or repetition. So, refers to the pattern repetition, recurrence, or organized movements of elements. Now, visual rhythm, we generally achieve it by the means of repetition, like progression or radiation. Um, Now we can do it with the change of colors in terms of hue, value, or chrome, or we can have something where the pattern is repeated itself with any change in rhythm and create a visual disruption. So if you look at these images, the rhythm in this wallpaper pattern, it's created by wavy lines in a two-dimensional composition. If you look at this one, a rhythm is forming as a design feature in a skirt. So we have straight lines that are essentially pleats, and it is achieved through the ways of repetition, gradation, and radiation. Sorry. Uh, when repetition rhythm is achieved through repetition, this is generally how it would look like. This means that the same or the similar element can be used in more than one design. So repetition of certain design elements such as line, value, color, texture, this can cause a sense of unity, consistency, and cohesiveness. Uh, Repetition with a variation can be interesting. Without variation, it might become monotonous. So first one is the regular repetition. Regular repetition occurs when the elements or the interval between the pattern of the elements are in the similar size, length, or in the other aspects. So generally both the intervals as well as the design such as line, shape, texture, all this remain similar and consistent throughout the design. One or more of these elements could vary. So this is one of the examples of regular repetition. When we have irregular repetition, there's a variation in repeats wherein there for design or spacing, and the repeating elements doesn't have to have any specific regular intervals. So the design essentially gets a random rhythm. So when we look at this image, the focus is essentially the center core and the outward lines and the edges. When we talk about the repetition in garments, it can be, how it is applied to garment is how the garment, the features of the garment is repeated. It can be done in collar, sleeves, trouser hems. We see this in skirts where there are regular repetitions of a tear structure or an irregular repetition of a wrapped around skirt. Rhythm can also be achieved through gradation. Uh, so it is to emphasize the gradual change in the elements of design, which can be line, shape, or space. So the components inherently remains the same, but there are certain changes in any increasing or decreasing order. The idea is to emphasize the unexpected or visual strong changes in elements. Gradation refers to the gradual change in elements. Uh, from warm to cool colors, from values of tints to tones, dark to light, all these things can create gradations. Here we have two designs where we have linear gradations or tonal gradations on the basis of the intensity of the color. Another way of doing, uh, you know, achieving repetition is through radial balance. Now, again, as we spoke about during the radial balance, we have a center point and the space around it is creates a radiating structure. So the eye moves, the focal point moves toward the center. The composition, if you look at below, it has a central focus point. If you look at the comments, this one, uh, if you look at this dress, it's a Balenciaga dress. It looks like it is almost being, starting from the bottom and then it is becoming bigger upwards. Or this design where the lines looks like it is radiating from the waist at the corner. Uh, the next element of design is emphasis. Emphasis is the idea to create a design such that uh, we create, we draw the attention of the viewer to a specific part of the design element. So, creating a component such that the focal point is demands the attention of the viewer at a maximum level and it is made strongly visible. There can be other principles, we can use the other principles to achieve the emphasis. There can be rhythm, there can be movement to create this, or for that matter, we can use certain colors to create this emphasis. Now, there are certain ways through which we uh, create emphasis. The first one is dominance. Dominance is when we create interest by uh, counteracting or confusing aspects. So we can apply dominance in one or more elements so that it is more noticeable than its surroundings. It hence becomes the focal point of interest and the composition is supported by the features in the design. So it can control attention of the viewer to determine what can be noticed first, what is dominant in one image, and its direction in the next step. So in a well-designed garment, one design can become the focus or the dominating detail, and this detail can be structural. For example, if there's a pocket, a placket, or if there's a yoke, or if there's a visual shape such as texture or color. For example, in a Chanel suit, the black edged details this draws attention, or in a white handbag, this Chanel logo in the dark black color. This essentially stands out. Uh, it generally are the dominant qualities that advances visually because these are the most noticeable ones. The sharp, thick lines dominate the thinner or the delicate lines, or the shiny textures dominate the matte textures. Brighter colors are generally more noticeable than muted colors. Other details are layered down in order to supplement and reinforce the dominant feature. Any feature which is does not make a significant and positive contribution to the design is generally omitted when we are talking about dominance. Other hand, we have uh, subordination. Subordination is essentially toning down the other elements in the composition so that a specific one draws attention and becomes the focal point. So, in some composition might have strong dominance that directs your attention. A subtle emphasis of other aspects can also become a secondary focus point. So the designer has to know, different components and details so that it can attract and retain the viewer's attention. Now, this emphasis can be created in three ways. The first of this is the contrast. Contrast is essentially difference that distinguishes the object from the image from other objects and backgrounds. Sorry. Uh, so if we try to look at contrast, the idea is to create a visual tension in the design and to break the monotony when the component is repetitive. So we can use different opposing elements. So for example, in this composition, there are two black rectangles, broken by a black circle. The focus of any design needs to be located at the center of the interest. The principle of contrast draws attention to the visual differences. Too much contrast scattered across the composition can, however, disrupt the unity. Therefore, unless the design is aimed purposefully to create the feeling of chaos, it is important to carefully plan whether the designer would like to place a maximum contrast. Any interesting design uses contrast elements such as diversity of shapes or sizes. So here we have, the Mondrian dress by Yves Saint Laurent, and it is essentially inspired by Pierre Moridian, the artist. And here we have these thick black lines dividing against the white background, and it is filled with its geometrical blocks of color that contrast each other, yet they are very balanced. So this, it's a striking visual appeal, and it has made an iconic dress in the fashion history. So it's very important to learn and determine the amount of contrast before we apply applied or you know before we fail to affect either the aesthetic sensibilities or to emphasize anything at all. The contrast can be achieved in multiple ways. First is the color contrast, where we are using extensively, we use color extensively for this purpose. Uh, we can also do it through shapes, or for that matter, through sizes. The next technique of emphasis is placement, wherein the central focus of the composition is typically placed at the strongest location for emphasis. For the further from this location that an element is placed, the less likely it is to be noticed. Uh, so if we understand that the position where the garment detail is placed is in relation to each other can affect the emphasis. The most important point of the emphasis when we are talking about composition is that uh, it has to be, around the center now or the dominant position. Further from the center, the less noticeable the detail tends to become. So once the focal point is established, we can do, proximity, similarity, or continuance to ensure that the specific element detail is noticed. So proximity is when the primary detail in focus, overlapping or touches, and successive focal accent is achieved. Uh, the more visible the object, in terms of contrast, the likelier it is to be noticed. So, in this case, if we try to look at this, we essentially the first thing that would come is because it is further away from the center of the uh, composition. Similarity, on the other hand, is where the object has same color, texture, size, but there has to be something, if it is same, then the eye moves. If it is not, then you know that this is where the emphasis goes. Uh, the next part of principle of design that is there is called harmony. Harmony is essentially when we are ensuring that all the parts works together cohesively. So it creates a very pleasing and complete look. So it is a visually satisfying effect of combining similar, related, or contrast elements. So the design is said to be harmonious when one or more qualities of the designs are similar. So there is a feeling of consistency. The harmony would result when adjusting colors in the color wheels, like for example, like chromatic colors like red and orange is used. Different combination of color, shapes in contrast with each other can also be harmonious, uh, but it involves a careful combination of design elements that share some common characteristics as shape, texture, or design elements. So in garments, uh, shapes that is there in terms of pockets, collars, scarf, they can harmonize if soft, curved, straight, angular according to the main form of the garment. But here, this one, if we look at this shirt, the color red and blue are from very different, being warm and cool colors respectively. But the color value, that is the lightness and the darkness, are similar. The solid colors of red and blue yarns have, an intermediate color merging of both colors. Hence, the common factor that is creating harmony in the design. Here, we see the ensemble. We have, a dress with uh, something where we have an overcoat. There is a suit inside, and there is a black shirt with a beret on the head. The entire thing, because of the checkered labels and the checkered fabric on the beret, the black stockings, the black shirt, and the black handbag together, the entire ensemble looks harmonious together. So essentially, if we conclude this session, it is when we design, uh, ensuring that uh, both the principles and the elements are used creatively and can create a very impactful storytelling if required. Yes, so with this, we end this session today.